Serpents from the Garden of Eos. Potion 2. The Atlantis of Hellas in the Middle Sea. Section C. The Cretan Atlantis of Hellas. Subsection 3. Palaces. Photo showing the Temple of Night Propylaeum, the Horns of Night, Knossos Palace, southwest, lower level. Photo of the Queen of Atlantis, the living goddess Persephone, Sacred Way Corridor, Knossos Palace, southwest, showing the Queen leading the sacred procession with the labyrinths of Neber Chair, nature. Episode A. Knossos. Segment 1. The Temple of Night. Photo of the Temple of Night Propylaeum, the stairway of 13 steps, Knossos Palace, southwest. The Temple of Night. Preview of C3A1. The first temple in which humans worshipped was a tribal cave. The Minoans of Atlantis and the Egyptians of the Nile Valley and the old European tribal societies descended from them retained this religious venue of customary practice down into the classical period. The first such cavern one encounters when reading of early histories is often that of the sacred cave at Delphi, with its sulphurous fumes that possessed the Pythoness, she that was once the high priestess of Dionysus. At first, this meeting was such a primal and even primitive setting for ceremony and augur is felt with a sense of amazement at the foreign quality of it. There is a perception gained of touching something very remote from today's modern world. This is so. You find that the god's cult somehow also brought with it the innovation of theater and drama. That Dionysus was a spiritual power that produced intoxication with the fruits from his vine. The god of the drama illusion does not seem modern in any of his attributes. He is distinctly other from most of today's popular religions. His image is a mask adorning the top of a rough-hewn stone pillar. He is unlike almost any of the gods we know of, except for one antithetical and occasionally evil demon spirit of the supernatural. Where did this serpent god of the cereal weed and vineyard come from? The god Dionysus, the son of night, arrived in Hellas along with his mother and sister wife from the fertile fields of Lower Egypt, not far from Memphis. Of course, in Egypt, he was not known as Dionysus, and he had a different name used by the dwellers on the Nile since the origin of their religion in the earliest evenings of fire and stone. Along the banks of the great river, Dionysus was known as Lord Set, the eye of the moon, and the serpent of the harvest fields. The pharaoh of the lower Nile lands was this serpent god of the night sky made carnate upon the earth. The queen was the sister wife of the night serpent, who was known as Lady Isis. Together, the snake dynasts of Memphis and the Delta ruled co-equally the nomes of the great northern kingdom underneath the stars of the night goddess of earth. The cult of the serpents had its beginning in a cavern of an oasis where a stoner snake priestess first discovered the art of planting seeds to grow wild, edible weeds. After that, the power of the cavern's sacrificial tomahawk came to be bestowed, eventually, upon the most productive of the new farmers taught the magic of planting by the serpentess. The society of hunters, who had wielded its power before, now became the pharaoh's picked retainers, and the Uranos cavern double-bladed triangular tomahawk passed forever into the hands of the serpentine weed-gatherers. Great Nebuchadnezzar, Great Neter, the supreme unified creator god of nature, became a ceremonial, sacrificial, magic wand of the serpent priestess queen of the nocturnal lands. She wielded Neter in the annual harvest procession from the fields and granaries up to the heights of the sacred tribal cave of the night goddess Nu, she of the shining sea of stars. There, the pharaoh and his attendant horned hunters of the twilight sun god were awaiting the dusk at the fire rock of Anu. The plan of the palace at Knossos forms a large rectangle with an open patio in the center of it. There are long walls on the west and east sides of the palace, and the northern and southern sides of the rectangle are of lesser dimension. The enormous central patio is also rectangular, and this makes for a distinct separation of the structure into large western and eastern sections on each side of it. Each of these large sections, either side of the patio, are themselves, in turn, divided into half in the middle by a grand staircase linking the patio level outside with the upper and lower floors of each side of the palace, with the lower floor being half submerged beneath the level of the earth. The east and west sections of the palace were designed to have different functional areas. On the west side, the southern half has the pharaoh's throne room and palace storage areas for large pithoi vase magazines containing olive oil and cereal grain. The northern half, beyond the grand staircase, has the queen's throne room and the ground floor rooms and halls used for religious, cultic purposes. Photos of the queen's throne room, what Arthur Evans called the oldest throne in Europe, show its plush interior done primarily with orange and black paint, and the amazing frescoes of the goddess Rhea's totem creature, the griffin. The queen's throne sits in front of the frescoed wall at the north, and the room has a serpentarium basin on the opposite side from the throne that is divided from the throne's immediate area by 3 tall black columns, perhaps representing the 3 goddesses of Knossos. The pharaoh's throne room is directly upon the opposite side of the grand staircase on the same level below the patio. Pharaoh's throne is in a much less plush room and forms a sort of guarded entry to the royal pillar crypts and the palace treasury. The pharaoh's southern half of the west side has mostly storage and artisan areas. The valuable west magazine stores of pithoi vessels are arranged in rows of narrow rooms the other side of the main hallway from the pharaoh's throne. The palace lapidary sculptor shops are accessible directly to the south side via linking corridors. The pharaoh is then the royal dynastic administrator of the palace wealth and the guardian of its crypts. The queen's throne is in the more plushly accoutred northern half of this west side, with direct access to the cult halls in the north of the palace. The top floor of the west side is even more interesting for its plan. Surrounding the west side of the palace, inside the walls, ran a processional corridor or sacred way for religious festivals. At the interior of this sacred way corridor on the south side was the front of the propylaeum or pylon gate that made a highly decorative architectural entrance to the Temple of Night upon the top floor. This propylaeum was on the ground floor with a staircase of 13 steps at its innermost extent leading up to the top floor Night Temple. The area around this propylaeum was hollowed out from the surrounding palace structures by atrium open-air terraces with pebbled cement walkways. The top of the stairs entered a shallow porched hall and then the Temple of Night between 3 columns in its interior spaces. A north-south lateral hallway was in the middle of both floors on the west side, and on the top floor, the other side of the hallway from the Temple of Night, was a great spacious hall with 2 very large columns at its center. This was the main cultic hall for the supreme gods of Knossos. The goddess of night was one of these Batilic column deities, and the other was her mate, who had been known in Memphis as Lord Atem, the horned twilight god of the sun. Upon Crete, the Minoans of the former Lower Kingdom, now in exile, had a different name for the god Atem that was taken from his new totem creature that was native to the island. Lord Atem had become Lord Zagreus, the Pan of the Wild Hills Way, with his new goat feet and horns, though he was still the Lord of Nature, an emanation of Nebuchadnezzar and the twilight sun god. The great hall on the upper west side was then a cultic gathering area for special devotions made to the goddess of night and her paramour, the horned sun god of twilight and all nature. Another somewhat lesser hall adjoined the great hall of the supreme pair of gods. This lesser hall was an area for devotional gatherings made to the serpent gods of Knossos, and it also contained a pair of columns of somewhat lesser dimension to represent the gods of the cereal weed harvest fields. A millennium later, at Athens and Eleusis, these gods were known as Dionysus and Persephone. Upon Crete, in the nights of the Imperium of Atlantis, they may still have been known by their Egyptian names of the high and the most unholy Lord Set and his sister mate, the Lady Isis of the cereal fields. The last pair of the 6 most high gods at Knossos had their cultic hall upon the opposite eastern side of the palace. This was the large East Hall found by Arthur Evans at the north of the east side domestic royal living areas. It was within this large devotional hall to the god Kronos and the goddess Rhea that Evans found the remains of a huge female sculpture with but the strands of long bronze hair links preserved among the ruins. That this over life-size model of a goddess was the Lady Rhea may be inferred by the position of the hall upon the palace east side, which is the direction of the dawn, the goddess Rhea having as one of her many attributes the planet Venus and the end of the dark of night. Her mate, the god Kronos, was similarly, though oppositely, the light-giving fire that burned through the dark hours of evening. It appears from the relics of Minoan Atlantis that the civilization was somewhat of a matriarchal society, much more so than the dynasties of the south of Egypt were. In Theban Egypt, the male gods were the main focus of cult, and the artistic productions of the southern mainland emphasize the male dominance of society. The lower Egyptians and Minoans seem to have been the opposite of the day-lit south, not only in their worship of the night and the moon, but also in the structure of the society. Whereas the Thebans are definitely patriarchal, the Memphites seem much more matriarchal. This can be seen in the art and religion of Minoan Atlantis most clearly, where it is the goddess of night and her daughters that are the focus of artistic production. This is almost the opposite of Thebes, where it is the male gods that the art seems to depict most often. The architecture and art of Knossos indicates a matriarchal structure within the Minoan society of Atlantis. A comparison of the royal throne rooms at Knossos seems to agree with this hypothesis. Whereas the queen's throne room is on the sacred north side of the palace, the pharaoh's is on the south side, away from the unholy areas of cult power. The queen's throne room is plush and has elaborate decorations, including 3 columns representing the goddesses of Knossos. The pharaoh's throne room seems more ordinary and has a situation before the royal crypts, though the treasury is also near. And it is most likely significant that the pharaoh's throne is directly below the upper floor Temple of Night. The pharaoh's situation near the palace stores of olive oil and the artisan shops makes it seem as if the pharaoh was more of a guardian and administrator than the real power of a dynastic imperium ruled by a cult of night. That the royal dynasts ruled co-equally can most likely be surmised, though it seems that the mystic queen of the serpents was, in effect, the ultimate superior if disputes somehow occurred. Another indication that this was so can be seen in the architectural choice of putting spacious balconies near the queen's throne for addressing the populace when they were gathered in the central patio or upon the sacred pathway fronting the telesterion. The pharaoh's throne room has no such luxurious capabilities, since it is below the Temple of Night, and the large central patio sanctuary, also venerating goddesses, is upon the front side of his throne room, facing the huge inner patio. This inner patio sanctuary, by the way, has a fresco showing multitudes of women in an audience with goddesses either side of a temple. There are no males portrayed upon the sanctuary fresco. The pharaoh's throne is upon the other side of the wall from this frescoed sanctuary. That the queen was the incarnate Lady Isis and the pharaoh the incarnate Lord Set can be deduced from the practice of Theban Egypt, where the pharaoh was the incarnate Lord Horus. Further indication that this was so can be gathered from the placement of a serpentarium in the queen's throne room, and the royal crypts next to the pharaoh's throne room, since the god Set was the original Lord of the Dead, before Osiris became so. Using their Greek names, the queen was Persephone, the daughter of Nyx, incarnate, and the pharaoh was Dionysus, the son of Nyx, incarnate. It was here on the palace east side that Arthur Evans found the royal living quarters on the ground floor level that was made to be half below that of the patio on the Kefala Hill crest. The main feature of the domestic area in the southeast quadrant, lower level, is what Evans called the Queen's Megaron, a living space with a central circular hearth and a wall adorned with the dolphin fresco, the painting done with a linear series of lotus blooms. Several bathrooms with complete modern facilities were within the royal quarters, one placed off the Megaron, and at least one of which had a large bronze bathtub. The plumbing of the palace was modern-like, with a system of ceramic tubing beneath the ground that supplied fresh water and disposed of waste. A remarkable feature of the domestic quarter was what Evans named the Hall of the Double Axes. This was a hall of lesser dimensions than the large devotional ones of the other gods, and it was directly linked with the living spaces of the Megaron. This hall was divided into halves by extending wall abutments and contained pyramidal bases for insertion of the standing axes of Never Chair, the supreme unity of God. The outside limits of this hall were open, without walls, and had steps that led into a garden atrium with a water well. The placement of this garden atrium off of the hall of Never Chair and inside the main palace walls shows that the double axes were indeed ceremonial wands of the supreme God of nature and existence. The outside of the palace on the west side had another large patio through which the corridor of the procession progressed after passing the pharaoh's southwest quadrant. The Sacred Way corridor had its start at an entranceway at the south end of the inner patio. This is where Evans found the famous fresco of the priest pharaoh in the debris of the corridor entrance floor. Then, after passing the propylaeum of the Temple of Night on the south side of the pharaoh's administrative areas, the corridor went round the outer edge of the magazine storage rooms to an outside entrance into the west patio. Near where the corridor entered the outside patio was what Evans named the West Porch, which was an ancient Minoan garden house for the royals on the south side of the western external patio. This structure wasn't very big, though it did contain a shaded area for thrones within its roofed and open entrance room that composed most of the building. Some distance before reaching the outside entrance, upon the palace wall fronting the corridor, was a fresco showing the queen leading the sacred procession. She is shown at fresco center, surrounded by attendees of the festival. She wears the open-breasted dress that was the fashion of Minoan ladies, and in each of her hands she holds the power of Never Chair, the double-bladed axe wands of the supreme God of nature. These Labrys axe wands represent the power of the goddess over life and death, and also the duality of existence within nature, especially that of the female and male, and night and day. After passing the west porch, the sacred pathway, now made of limestone blocks surrounded by a wide border of green stone trim, made its way to the palace northwest exterior corner, where there was a sunken theater with stepped seating along its embankment sides. The estimate of Evans was that the theater seating capacity was not large, though it did contain space for approximately 500 spectators in the audience. Beneath the strata levels of the theater, Evans found a most curious circular walled pit that had been filled in with debris from the period before the theater's upper strata construction. Was this an outside serpentarium near the theater used by the priestesses of the serpents? Did the beginnings of drama involve a serpent choral dance made by these priestesses? The placement of a previous serpentarium beneath the theater seems to indicate that the drama did once include a performance by the priestesses of Lord Set and Lady Isis, and this was most likely a choral dance with the unholy serpents of the cult. That the performers were also masked, as was Lord Dionysus, is also very likely. After turning near the theater, the sacred pathway went by the north side of the palace, where it finally ended at the entrance pylons of a large rectangular building attached to the walls in the northeast quadrant. This building had a guarded entry with a vestibule built into the pylon gates, after which it opened into a single large room with 10 columns in the center, arranged in pairs. There was no seating around the interior walls of this telesterion. Only the columns in the middle used to make it appear like an artificial cavern. Lord Knossos and Lady Rhea were the god and goddess of human love and sexuality, since before the discovery of serpentine seed planting. Knossos was named after Lord Knossos, and Lady Rhea was known on the Minoan island of Cyprus as the goddess Aphrodite, a goddess with temples of human sexuality. The nights of the mysteries at Knossos were very dark, mind-expanding, and unholy.
Could just passing through. I'm not over the step, not even halfway there. I'm sick of waiting for you, sick of listening to screw. I don't want to let go, but I'll be damned if I stay in this freak show. Waiting for the red light. Deja vu. I'm still under the sheet, so crying at your feet. I'm sick of waiting for you, sick of swallowing the truth. I don't want to give in when I've got deadlier sins to commit. Waiting for the red light to come and make possess you tonight. A little bright, a little better, a little less. Let go and keep my appetite wetter. Oh, what a fool.
Section C3, Episode A2, The Sacred Grove of Dance. Knossos Palace, East Olive Grove. Columnar Sanctuary of Night and the Twilight Sun. Knossos Palace, Central Patio. The Sacred Grove of Dance. Preview of C3A2. The growth of the cereal grains, the olive orchards, and the vineyards was vitally important to the economy of Atlantis. Periodic rains helped these agricultural staples produce more abundant harvests. Lady Rhea was the goddess of dark rains, producing fertility in the soil. Lord Knossos was the air in the surface area of the earth. The moisture provided by Rhea's rains made the surface airs and soils more fertile for plant and seed growth. The goddess Rhea was also the goddess that presided over the making of libations. The name of the goddess is derived from the Greek word for pouring or streaming of liquids. Lady Rhea was also known as the streaming light of the dawn, and in later Greek she was also known as the goddess Eos. The mythic ideas of the dawn and the fertile, dark rains were similar. The sun god's ascent and the morning of each day was a birth of the cosmological egg that produced the universe of existence. The streaming light of Rhea's dawn was a type of moisture remaining in the airs of Knossos near the earth's surface. Dawn was the mythic fulfillment of the night's union with the twilight god of the sun. Evening of each day was the mythic death of the solar horned hunter god. Lord Zagreus, the goat-foot god, was this twilight hunter upon Crete. He was also the bull-foot god as well. In the Egyptian language, he was known as Lord Atem, or Lord Osiris. The sacrifice of bulls was a ceremony left over from the hunt sacred to Pharaoh. Priestesses of Rhea and Persephone gathered the holy blood of the sacrifice. The labrys tomahawk was the cultic instrument used to kill the bull and butcher its meat into portions. Most likely, the descended ritual of Atlantis was performed at twilight when the sun set over the mountains west of Knossos. Pharaoh and his hunters were most probably the ceremonial executors of the holy hunting kill. The goddess of night and her daughters were then afterwards made beneficiaries of the horned creature's flesh and blood. Some type of ritual transference was then necessary between the hunters and the priestesses of night. When the fruits of the sacrifice and the labrys were delivered and returned to the goddess of dark earth. The sacrifice was an offering made by the Pharaoh sun god to the queen of night. The labrys tomahawks had become magical instruments for ceremonial, ritual use and were kept in the cavern temple. Honey, dinner is ready. Perhaps the Pharaoh and the Minotaur prince were both carvers at the sacrificial preparation after the hunt. This might explain the use of both labrys tomahawks. Pharaoh and Minotaur were the master hunters of the horned creatures that they sacrificed. Pharaoh and Minotaur were not these horned creatures themselves. The great horned hunter of the tribe was originally the sun at day and the moon at night. Horned creatures such as the bull and the goat were simply what the god hunter preyed upon so as to provide nourishment for the tribe. The sacrificed bulls and goats were offerings of the god, displaying his totem horns in the evening after the sacred hunt. The horned bull or horned goat was not the god himself. They were the sacred animals of Neter, or nature, Neter being the name of the labrys tomahawk in the Egyptian language. Note that Neter also has the meaning of God. God is a hunter, the great horned hunter of the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon were the first male gods that humans worshiped. The night and the earth were the first female gods that humans worshiped. The moon was the male sun god at night. Within the propylaea of the Temple of Night at Knossos, Sir Arthur Evans found remains of frescoes that had adorned the side walls of the structure. Evans theorized that there were originally up to 80-some fresco figures of temple acolytes carrying the sacred vessels and cult implements of the goddess from the temple down through its entrance level. One of these frescoed attendees upon the goddess was found in several large fragments upon the floor of the propylaea, where it had once formed the stuccoed surface of the side wall. This fresco of an acolyte carrying a Rhyton vase in the Sacred Way procession was named the Cupbearer fresco by Evans. The acolyte servant of the goddess is a youthful male with long black hair who wears the traditional sheath kilt of Minoan fashion. A belt around his thin waist secures the kilt below, and the belt has a decoration composed of a linear series of serpent coils. The kilt itself displays an interconnecting grid of 4-point golden stars with systems of blue circles within each cardinal point of the stars. At the center of each star is another system of red circles surrounding a larger red dot. The purpose of the golden starry pattern was to display a sign of the night goddess over the entire fabric of the kilt. The 4-point star in the shape of the modern addition sign was indicative of the night sky. Each cardinal point of this basic star sign was filled with an arrangement of 7 blue circular dots surrounding a larger blue dot in the center of them. This pattern of 7 blue dots arranged in a circle system represented 1 week of 7 nights, or the 7 stars of the serpent constellation. This pattern of 7 blue dots arranged in a circle system represented 1 week of 7 nights, or the 7 stars of the serpent constellation. Each point of the golden star sign with its circular group of 7 blue dots was 1 week of a month. At the middle of each gold star was a larger series of red dots in a circle, although these varied in number, some stars having 9 red dots and others 10 red dots. The red dots at center of each gold star were a count of months, some 9 months and others 10 months, each month being equal to 28 days. This pattern upon the kilt of the acolyte then expressed the stars of the night sky as the offspring of the night goddess Nyx, with each star of the firmament given birth by the goddess in a period of 9 or 10 lunar months of 28 days, approximately. The kilt of the acolyte in the cupbearer fresco has then a woven pattern upon it displaying the stars of the night goddess Nyx. After Evans found the fresco fragments in the debris upon the floor of the propylaea, they next had to apply a layer of plastering underneath the pieces for their removal. As this precaution for removal required drying of the plaster beneath the fragments, the fresco could not be moved the day of its discovery, and a local Cretan excavator was stationed that night in the propylaea to watch over it. Arthur Evans recalled the supernatural happening that occurred the same night of the fresco find, when the lone excavator slept near it in the temple. Somehow or other he fell asleep, but the wrathful saint appeared to him in a dream. Waking with a start, he was conscious of a mysterious presence. The animals round began to low and neigh, and there were visions about. "Fantasy," he said, in summing up his experiences next morning. "The whole place spooks." Evans, Volume 3, page 708. Sounds as if the lone excavator had a supernatural happening that night in the temple, a natural sensory encounter with a spirit or daemon of the underworld. Could something such as this, some happenstance of the nether other, be what the ancient Mystes initiates referred to when they later claimed to have acquired a lesser fear of death? This explains our modern fascination with accounts of ghost and spirit sightings, because if one is fortunate enough to ever have an encounter with the supernatural, one thing that is realized afterwards, upon memoried reflection, is the sharp, numinous, otherworld quality of it. And what was that exception to everything previously seen or heard by the senses? The unnatural? The plan of the palace at Knossos was based upon the religion of night and the mythological attributes of the gods. Most of the rooms on the west side of the palace had some function in the cult of the goddess of night, or in that of her offspring, the serpent gods of the cereal fields and vineyards. A sacred way corridor began at the southwest exit of the central patio and circled the entire western half of the palace, linking the temple, the theater, and the telesterion hall. The southwest quadrant held the pharaoh's throne room and the top floor Temple of Night. The lower floor contained the palace magazine storage rooms with the rich pithoi supplies of olive oil and cereal, weed grains. Olive oil was a gift of the goddess Nyx, used both in cooking and as a fuel for lamps. The olive tree was the sacred tree of night, since its oil produced lighting in the dark evening. Cereal grain pithoi storage was also here, and the offspring of Nyx were the gods of the cereal weed harvest. Wine and pomegranate elixir were also stored here in the pithoi magazines, and these staple beverages were made from the fruits of the serpents. Directly south of the Pharaoh's throne room, and near to the propylaea entrance of the temple, were the many artisan shops of the palace, where specialists in metallurgy, sculpture, and pottery making had areas of manufacture. Adjacent to the Pharaoh's throne room, and entered from it, were the royal pillar tombs and the palace treasury. The Pharaoh of Night was the living incarnation of Lord Set, and somewhat later he became known as Lord Dionysus of Atlantis, in the new Greek language descended from the Egyptian. Lord Dionysus Set was the living personification of natural fertility and the abundance of the earth's gifts to the people of Atlantis. Lord Set was also the god of death and the ruler of the underworld of night. The serpent god had always been natural abundance and death's lord since before the Neolithic discovery of seed planting. Therefore, the royal tombs and the palace treasury were placed next to the throne of Night's Pharaoh. The living Lord Set was the duality of existence, the gift of natural abundance and wealth, as well as the ultimate death of the flesh-formed body. West was the direction of night and death. North was the direction of the night sky, unholy to the serpent god and goddess. The queen of Atlantis at Knossos was the incarnation of the goddess Persephone. She was the living daughter of Nyx. Her Egyptian language name was Lady Isis. Serpent Queen Persephone may have fed the sacred snakes kept in the basin of her throne room at the libation vase before her royal seat. The northwest quadrant of the queen's throne room was composed of cultic areas, as was the entire top floor on the west side. The north side of the palace was especially unholy, since it was the cardinal direction of the night sky, sacred to the serpent gods. Here, on the north palace side, were the most important of unholy structures, including the theater, serpentariums, initiatory chambers, and the telesterion hall. The east side was more secular and had the royal living areas on both floors of the southeast quadrant. Space for royal socializing in a more relaxed setting was probably the function of the Hall of Labres, which opened onto an indoor garden and extended onto the top floor as well. North of the royal living areas on the east side was yet another large cultic hall for worship of the eldest pair of Night's offspring. Knossos and Rhea were the primeval gods of light and air, the dark and the waters. Knossos was the fire god of twilight, and his sister wife, Rhea, was the goddess of dark waters and the dawn. Once there was a large 10-foot tall sculpture of the goddess Rhea in the hall. Evans found the bronze curls of her hair in a carbonized heap of burnt remains upon the east hall floor. That Lady Rhea was indeed the goddess of the dawn, as shown by a fresco Evans found in a room above the northern entrance to the patio. This is the fresco titled "The Sacred Grove and Dance" by Evans, and it was found in tandem with the temple fresco that displays the column sanctuary of the central patio at the celebration of a festival. Both of these frescoes had adorned the walls of the same room. The patio sanctuary of the temple fresco has 4 columns that represent the 6 main gods and goddesses of Atlantis in the 3 alcoves of its facade. The paired upper columns are the goddess of night and the twilight sun god. The lower alcoves on the right and left have only 1 column to represent the pairs of their divine offspring, although there are sacral horns for each deity in each alcove of the temple painting. The fresco also shows the dark and light rectangles used to decorate the areas above each section, with each rectangle representing a day or a night of a lunar month. An Egyptian hieroglyph with the meaning of mountainous land, or possibly the underworld, is used to delineate the 13 months of a lunar year upon the temple's front walls. A lower front middle section of the temple has a decoration showing a lotus flower with 12 petals on each side, divided in half by a column. This decoration with the lotus flower was the monthly festival day of celebrating the union of the night goddess with the twilight solar god and his rebirth the next dawn. This decoration with the lotus flower was the monthly festival day of celebrating the union of the night goddess with the twilight solar god and his rebirth the next dawn. The twilight solar god was Lord Zagreus on Crete, and had been Lord Atem or Lord Osiris in Egypt. After his death each day, he had become Lord Set of the underworld, its serpent ruler, who was the moon's eye, until the following dawn, when he once again appeared as the sun. The column separating the lotus flower decoration has serpent coils filling the interior of it. The temple fresco is a painting of the columnar sanctuary that is in front of the pharaoh's throne room on the patio side. Evans thought that the grove of the sacred dance in the painting of that name must have been on the east side of the palace, below the multiple walls of the east bastion, where a stairway led directly downwards from the central patio. The hill is steep under the crumbling blocks of the bastion before it finally levels out onto a large, open, flat area bordered on the other side by ancient olive trees, gnarled and massive, growing thick above the riverbank. Here, thought Evans, must have been the grove of the dance, most likely the very dancing place of Ariadne, built by legendary Daedalus and inscribed upon the shield of Achilles by the metallurgist god Hephaestus. Therein, furthermore, the famed god of the two strong arms cunningly wrought a dancing floor, like unto that which in wide Knossos Daedalus fashioned of old for fair-tressed Ariadne. There were youths dancing, and maidens of the price of many cattle, holding their hands upon the wrists of the other. Of these, the maidens were clad in fine linen, while the youths wore well-woven tunics faintly glistening with oil, and the maidens had fair chaplets, and the youths had daggers of gold hanging from silver baldricks. Homer, Iliad, Book 18, 590. The streaming light of dawn was an attribute of Lady Rhea. She filled the atmosphere of Lord Kronos with a glowing eastern horizon and bright pouring beams that brought the first of his light at the end of night's dimming gloom. With the arrival of Rhea's bright flowing strands, the amorous god of the airs raised the starry goddess Nyx back into the sky. The dark goddess of the arching firmament then released her embrace upon the twilight sun in the stone-pillared and cavernous veil pits of the underworld, returning reluctantly up and out into the shining voids of the cosmos. Revitalized in the shadow lands of death, the goat-hoofed god of hunters also left the cave of earth with its rough-hewn rock, piping on his jaunt through the thick-herded fields and over the wild hills' way. The shining egg of the sun made a new day, and the thorny and spindle hind legs of Khepera forever toiled, rolling a bright dung orb towards the noon. Ariadne's dancing place, on the palace east side, near the ancient olive grove beside the river, was most likely used for greeting the dawn of Eos. The goddess Rhea had many later reincarnations in Greek myth. She became the queen of the Olympian gods, the goddess Aphrodite of love and sexuality, and the goddess Eos of the dawn, as well as the Sphinx griffin Nemesis. The fresco of the sacred grove shows the 7 priestesses of Rhea dancing at dawn with arms raised in greeting to the new day sun. They are accompanied by the priestesses of the goddess Persephone, who join them in the dance. Beneath the olive trees of the grove are the lotus priestesses of the goddess Nyx, observing the festivities in the shadows of the nocturnal olives beside the waters of the river. This grouping of the priestess dancers agrees with that pictured on the temple fresco, within which they were shown sitting beside the column alcoves of their goddesses of devotion. The priestesses of Nyx were also shown on the temple fresco, within which they each had a lotus flower adorning their hair, as they sat talking in the top row above the main columns of the sanctuary. Both frescoes found by Evans were from the same room above the north entrance to the patio, a location not far from the Queen's northwest balcony and the northern cult structures of our most unholy serpents, Lord Dionysus and Lady Persephone.
Here in my garden, where I seek my peace, when darkness creeps upon me, given the solace I seek, I will be waiting, I will be waiting, I will be waiting right here for you. Deep in the soul winter, my heart is starting to weaken. The sky ain't made out of money. The wind whispers through the tree. I will be waiting, I will be waiting, I will be waiting right here for you. I will be waiting, I will be waiting, I will be waiting right here in the garden, in the garden, wait. I met Mr. Green Reaper. He offered an exit too sweet. Don't lovers each get their eating? Please, before I leave, I will be waiting, I will be waiting, I will be waiting right. I will be waiting, I will be waiting, I will be waiting right here for you.
Sister of night, when the hunger descends and your body's a fire, an inferno that never ends, an eternal flame that burns in desire's name. Sister of night, when the longing returns, giving voice to the flame, calling you through flesh that burns, breaking down your will, moving for the kill. Oh sister, come for me, embrace me, assure me. Hey sister, I feel it too. Sweet sister, just feel me, I'm trembling, you heal me. Hey sister, I feel it too. Sister of night, in your saddest stress, as you walk through the light, you are desperate to impress, so you slide to the floor, feeling insecure. Sister of nights, with the loneliest eyes, tell yourself it's alright. He'll make such a perfect bride, but the cold light of day will give the game